When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello guys. I thought I would record an intro given that this is part of another video. I just wanted to make it a little bit more digestible and turn it into its own video given that it's a pretty good topic for that. But today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the Feast for Crows POVs ranked. And so we're going to go through all of them, why I like some, why I don't like others. Let me know down in the comments for Feast for Crows, what was your favorite POV? What was your least favorite POV? And let's get into it. Also, if you want to see more of this content, this is part of a bigger video, my Feast for Crows conclusion. So I checked that out on the channel as well. I thought, I want to say this before I get into this. For the most part, I enjoyed all the POVs in this book, but I did want to rank them. And the way I rank them, we're also going to be talking about what happens in their POVs, just kind of a summary and why I think they are maybe not good or, you know, good. So number 13, I debated on this one for a while. I think number 12 and number 13 are pretty much like almost the same for me, but I ended up going with number 13 being Eris, because Eris, in my opinion, is really just a prelude to Ariane. That's really what it is. It's also to make his death a little bit more meaningful because we have a POV inside of, you know, his character, his mind. So we know a bit more about him. And this chapter is interesting. It's a very short chapter, but it's interesting given the fact that, you know, we're seeing this character struggle with his vows, his honor, his oaths and things. And that is all very interesting. And it also makes Ariane very interesting as well, because you're sitting here going, okay, is Ariane, especially when you don't know who Ariane is, you're sitting here going, is Ariane manipulating him? Oh, wow, we're going to be doing this whole Crown Marcella plot that's been kind of alluded to in Ario's first chapter, or his only chapter. So it all makes, this chapter is for the betterment of Ariane, not for Eris, right? Eris is very similar into the fact of like Ario, where he's a vessel of knowledge. He's a vessel of the plot. But that gets us into number 12. Ario, again, third POV of the book. He is not an interesting POV. Like, his character is not interesting at all. There's nothing to this character. Like, when we talk about Asha only has one chapter in this book, but you get who she is as a character. She's very fun to read. She's interesting. Ario Hoda is the complete opposite. So you might then be asking, well, why do you have Ario Hoda above Eris? Ario Hoda, plot reasons, is more interesting, right? The way his chapter is paced is great, right? Each third of the chapter, you have a sand snake coming along with a new ideology or a new way of handling the issue of Dorne, right? How should we respond to Oberyn's death? All that's very interesting. Like, everyone in this chapter is interesting, except for Hoda. Duran is very interesting. We're trying to figure out, who is this guy? What is he up to? What is his plan? Right? And that's all going to get paid off in Ariane's last chapter. So again, this chapter also is very similar to Eris's chapter because it all goes to build up Ariane's POV more than it does Ario's POV. And so that's another reason, again, only having one POV, again, is also going to put you quite lower on this list. So yeah, I did what I could for these two. If you're a big fan of them, I'm sorry that they're this low, but they were obviously the two worst. Which is interesting, given that I really like the Dornish plot. It's just, when you're doing a ranking of the POVs, they just have to be at the bottom for me. But I don't know. Number 11. Now, this is the one that I've got a lot to say about. Number 11 is Sam. And I want you guys to remember that Sam, when you look at chapter count, is number 4. Like, he has 5 chapters. That's just below Jaime. He is now ranked under multiple characters that have only 1 chapter, or 2 chapters, or 3 chapters. Why is that? Because Sam is by far, in this book, the most forgettable POV. He's the most unneeded POV of this entire story. Like, I don't see any difference from just having his first POV chapter. And his first POV chapter is interesting because it also gets included pretty much in the next book as well with John. So it almost feels like his first POV almost isn't needed either, but I still like the inclusion. I like what George is going with. And so you can almost have his first POV and his 5th POV be his only POVs of the book. Have him being very early on and have the last chapter of the book. I don't think he actually should have been the last chapter of the book, but, you know. But Sam is this journey. His chapter 2, his chapter 3, his chapter 4. It's so boring. Nothing happens plot-wise. The only things that happen are things that are like, oh, this is going to set up Arya to kill Daron. It's like, okay. The only things I liked about chapter 2, 3, and 4 is Aemon. And Aemon's not even in chapter 4. So chapter 4, not great. But chapter 2 and 3, I liked the tidbits from Aemon, talking about maybe his younger years, some information, lore building. I liked Aemon, but think about chapter 2. Chapter 2 is really just, they're going past Skagos, it's a storm, people are complaining, all that. Nothing happens. Chapter 3, they get to Bravos, and they've been wasting all their money, Aemon's dying, Sam has to go find Daron, he gets in a fight, and he's just thrown out. And then they find a ship. That's it. It's like, it feels like a side quest that you could have just explained in Sam's last chapter. Sam literally recounts their adventure to Marwyn. Or to Alaris as well. We could have just gotten all the information then, or we could have had a longer Sam chapter, like thinking about what happened, Aemon's death, whatever. Because Aemon's death isn't even on screen anyway. Like, we see his funeral, but we don't see him actually dying. So you don't need that anyway. Like, his POV is not a strong point of this book. It's in my opinion probably the weakest point of this book, because there's nothing interesting about his POV, in my opinion. Like, there's outside of like his last POV, there's nothing that's new or interesting that he really builds, because he goes to Bravos and it's like, we already have a better Bravos POV in Arya. Arya is better than Sam in pretty much every single way possible. And maybe I'm being harsh. Let me know what you guys think about Sam in this book, but I personally hate this book for Sam. It doesn't do anything for Sam as a character. It doesn't do anything for really Gilly as a character. Aemon dies. Like, it really is just to get Sam to Old Town. But we didn't need the chapters in between to get there, is what I'm saying, right? So, I don't know. Sam is not a favorite of mine for this book, which is why he's at 11. Number 10 is Asha. Again, the only reason she's like lower down here is because she only had one POV. She has a great POV, even though it is one POV though. She comes off as very charismatic. We see her being, you know, a woman leader, you know, of a group of men, which is something you don't very often see in this world. So she's very unique in that way. It's interesting seeing how she's devoted to trying to take her father's throne after he's passed, and how she reacts to that. Her interaction with Roderick the Reader is always very interesting to read. And so all of that's interesting. All of her setup for her character, building the atmosphere of the Kingsmoot to come, is all great, right? Like, she is a very awesome chapter in this book, but we only get one of her, right? Like, I would have enjoyed more Asha chapters in this book instead of Sam. Like, I don't know, personally, I enjoyed Asha's chapter in this book, but because she only has one, there's not a ton to talk about with her, right? She's going to get more going forward, and she'll be a better POV, but so far, not a lot in this book. Now, Pate, I have him as number 9. He's my highest ranked POV with only one chapter. I think he's just a perfect introduction into this story specifically. You know, his plot specifically ties into the last chapter of the book. He is someone that really takes all the conflicts of how the hardships of the common person, the struggle of love, all of that's fantastic. The way the common people view events that have been happening, especially with like Daenerys, for instance, it's really awesome. Getting to see Old Town really for the first time. It's not, we don't get to see a lot of it, but like, it's our first real introduction into Old Town, is fantastic. But unfortunately, he only has one chapter, so this is the highest I could really bring myself to put him. And that leads us to number 8, Victarion. Victarion has 2 very good chapters. Neither one is like top 10 of the book, but his first chapter is, again, arriving for the Kingsmoot. It's not the actual Kingsmoot, but arriving there, right? And we see the atmosphere, the tension build between him and Euron, even kind of the reflection of, we saw with Renly and Stannis, how they should have come together and beaten the Lannisters, but they didn't. Similar here, where you have Victarion and Asha is saying, you know, I will support you if you basically make me your hand. That doesn't happen. Victarion won't allow that. Victarion is too conservative, while Asha is too progressive. I love the way that we build up everyone's ideologies in this chapter. Euron's introduction into this chapter is one of the best of any character, of building any character in the entire story. His second chapter, right, following the Kingsmoon, how we get this awesome battle scene to begin, but we also see how Euron is trying to work some of his manipulation, how Euron is struggling with the Ironborn and their ways, and sending Victarion on this mission to get Daenerys and dragons. All of it's really good, right? Victarion doesn't have a bad chapter. I think there's other POVs because they have more POVs than him, like more chapters, and also because maybe they have a better chapter than he does. But he's still a very good addition. Again, all of the Greyjoy POVs are fantastic in this book. But that gets us to 7. I'm going to talk about 6 and 7 because they're right next to each other. But Arya's 7 and 6 is Sansa. The two are very similar. I think Arya is very consistent. She is very good. She is top, probably 20. She probably has all 3 of her chapters around that top 25, 20 area of the book. And so all of her POVs are good. They're all interesting. They're really, her big things is about identity and death. All that's very interesting, right? Or seeing Arya come to Braavos is really awesome. Her introduction is way better than Sam's when it comes to getting to Braavos. We see her exploring it, and we see her learning. Her second chapter, again, taking more lessons, learning more, getting more in depth into the Facelessmen and their history is very interesting. And then by the end of the chapter, in that chapter, having to get rid of all of her belongings of Arya, but hiding Needle, for us as a wink of the audience, to be like, this is still Arya. By her third chapter, again, it's her, killing Daeron, and she wakes up blind. All that's really interesting. It's a great setup for the next book. There's nothing in here that's fantastic. One of the top 5 chapters of the book, which is what we're going to see a lot with the upcoming POVs. But to me, the reason she's below Sansa at 6 is because Sansa does have one of those really good chapters. I don't think I had it top 5. We're going to talk about it in this video, but her chapter with, again, Littlefinger playing all these lords and ladies of the Vale is fantastic. It's one of my favorite chapters of the book. The way we see him manipulate people, things that Sansa will have to develop. But even in the first chapter, the way we see Littlefinger mess with Nestor Royce and make him a loyal person to him, all of that is fantastic in the way that he does that. And it makes Sansa so interesting as a POV, the way she's able to then take some of those teachings and apply that to how she deals with Robin, how she is using this identity of Elaine. Now, the one argument I would say for why maybe you would put Sansa below Arya is because Sansa's third chapter, it's not really that good until the end. It's similar to Catelyn's chapter when she's going up to the Eyrie, where there's not a lot happening. It's just this journey we've now seen again. And it doesn't get interesting until the end when Littlefinger tells her what his plan is, right? Going through the lineage of who the next heir is and how it's Harry the heir if Robin Arryn was to die. Setting up Winds of Winter perfectly. And it's a great end, but how he got there was, it kind of seems like a big problem George had in this book quite a lot was he just explains a lot of the journey, right? We have a lot of journeying to do. And so I can see that argument. I think the reason I put Sansa above Arya is I think Sansa's first 2 chapters are probably better than all of Arya's chapters in this book. So that's kind of why I chose it. Sansa just has 2 big highs and 1 low. That's how I look at him. But that gets us to our top 5. And again, for me, I've talked about my favorite plot in this book was the Greyjoy and the Dornish plots. I liked them quite a lot. I think they're not the best POV overall. I think, we have other characters that are given more time and they are more consistent. But number 5 is Aeron. Aeron being the number 2 POV. This is the POV to me that on a second reread, or I'm now multiple rereads, but he is the one that's the most improved. You appreciate him more, right? His dynamic and how his faith is tested. He's this character that we come in with, and Balon Greyjoy has been killed, and we see how he tries to navigate the situation, right? Euron has returned, but who should be on the seat, right? He can't name Victarion because Euron's older. He can't name Asha because she's a woman. And that goes against his religion or his own prejudice. So we see how he has to come to this decision to do the King's Moot, which is interesting, right? It's a great setup for that. And right, we'll get more POVs to set up the King's Moot as a whole with Asha and Victarion, but it's a great introduction into this. And it's really interesting to learn about the Ironborn ways, right? The drowned god religion as a whole, because we haven't seen it much, right? We've only seen it with tidbits of Theon. This is really our first real introduction into this religion. And I think it's very interesting in learning more about the Ironborn. Even though they are morons, it's interesting the way we learn about them. It's a great setup. One of the better chapters of the book. It's not like a crazy chapter or anything, but then you get to his second chapter. His second chapter is the best chapter of this book. You could debate me on it. You're not going to change my mind. The King's Moot is the best chapter of this book. It just... seeing all the different players, how they maneuver this meeting of who is going to be the king / the queen of the Iron Islands, all the different philosophies, and how it's a waiting game, right? If Victarion waits to go last, maybe he beats Euron at this King's Moot. Seeing how Aeron is seeing through all of this, he's the one that set up this meeting. He knows what he wants to happen. He even is trying to prompt Victarion to win. He has a clear bias. And seeing Euron as this character that just takes over, right? He takes this book over, or takes over this chapter. He is such a character that is such a presence, and he just was completely missing in the show. But the line, I think about how when people see him or ships see him, they pray. That whole thing is just insanely good. The whole thing with Dragonbinder and introducing this into this world is interesting. The different politics going on, right? Asha being very progressive, saying that we should start trading with the North and not, reaving and doing all these things. She's right. The problem is the people are not going to elect you when you say things they don't want to hear. Think about politicians. Politicians really, they tell you what they think you want to hear. They'll change what their speeches are based on where they are in a certain location. American politics is very much done this way, right? If you will listen to speeches, they're very inconsistent depending on where they're at. If they're at a place that's more moderate, you're going to, speak more moderate and not as progressive or conservative. If you're at a place that's very conservative, you're going to spout very conservative stuff. And so Victarion then takes the flip approach of Asha. Victarion says we're going to, keep doing what Balon wanted us to do, right? We're going to keep pillaging and reaving and all these things. And then Euron takes both of their arguments and makes the perfect argument. He keeps it enough where it's going to please the audience, but it's enough to excite them, to change how things are going just slightly to make it even more interesting. To make them even more interested and want to choose him. All of that's perfectly done. It's one of the best written chapters George R. R. Martin has ever made. He seems to like doing that with the Greyjoy plot, especially in Winds of Winter, and Dance as well. But that kind of will get us into number 4. Now, number 4 is interesting as well because number 4 is Arianne, and she has the same amount of chapters as Aeron. So you might be thinking, how is Aeron number 5 if he had your favorite chapter of the book? Well, the problem is that when Arianne gets a chapter, they don't miss. Okay? Arianne is already one of the most interesting characters in this book, specifically for me and going forward. So she's more of an interesting POV to me. I like her more. I like to read her more than Aeron. But she also has 2 top 10 chapters of this book. Her Queenmaker chapter, number 2 chapter of the book. It's fantastically paced. It's a great culmination of the build-up that we've seen from Areo and Aerys. It's a great chapter. It's one of the best well-written. Everything feels like there's some sort of edge or something wrong going on. And that betrayal that Arianne feels as Aerys dies is so well done. And Arianne, again, fantastic character to be seeing all of this. And that kind of gets us into her second chapter. So her second chapter is the Fire and Blood chapter, where all the pieces of the Dornish plot finally come together. It's been this great overarching mystery of what's Doran planning. There's got to be more to it than that. What happened right at the end of her first chapter? What really occurred there? All of this finally comes out. But before we even get there,
Ariane has a lot of reflection, self-reflection about what she did that could have led to it, who betrayed her. So many interesting things are set up by this 2-chapter arc for Ariane. And when we finally get to Duran's speech by the end of it, revealing that Ariane was never meant to be heir, she was meant to be the queen, it has ripple effects because it recontextualizes how we think about, for instance, Viserys or the early Targaryen plot in Book 1. It makes you think, oh, damn, okay, the Dornish are planning this the whole time. Duran's just trying to wait till the right moment. It also sets up Quentyn for the next book, which I'm not exactly thrilled about because I don't like Quentyn, but, you know, it's so well done. And then just to have it at the end that, you know, to bring fire and blood, it's just so well written for me. And Ariane, she's a perfect POV. If she had gotten more in this book, I would have loved that. I don't think casual viewers would have loved that, but she is by far one of my favorite POVs. She is, I think, my favorite POV going into the next book, right up there with Jon Con. So, again, love Ariane, a staple of this book, and yeah. Moving on, we have 3 being Cersei. So again, the top 3 are all going to be the main 3 POVs. I really enjoyed all 3 of them. I just think I enjoyed a lot of them at different times. Cersei has the most chapters of this book, and I've talked about already why she is a little lower than the other 2. And it's just because she starts out really strong. Everything is really strong about Cersei, building on this mystique of her reaction to Tywin's death, Tyrion escaping, the entire prophecy that she's giving, because it recontextualizes her character. Why does she make certain actions? Why does she blindly hate Tyrion? Because she thinks Tyrion's going to kill her one day. Her children are going to die. All these things makes you recontextualize, think about Cersei and go, wow, okay, now I understand why she made that decision in like book 3 or book 2. Okay, that makes sense. We may not agree with her, but that makes sense. We see what she's motivated by. All of that's really good. The problem is when we get to like chapter 5 to like 7, those 3 middle chapters, maybe even a little bit of chapter 4, I would say as well, and not a lot happens. It's a lot of Cersei complaining, a lot of Cersei just being an awful human being with very minor subplots, right? Like the Bronn subplot. It's interesting, but it doesn't really like matter too much in the whole scope of everything. We get her like reacting to like the Greyjoy plot. Okay, interesting. But not a lot happens. Like they all kind of blend together. But then you come back at the very, very end of the book. So like chapter 8 to chapter 10, really good once again, right? Seeing Cersei, how she believes in her mind, she's rising to power, but for us, the readers, we know she's actually at the bottom. She's at her lowest. And seeing all this blow up in her face when she's captured by the Faith, it's so ironic. It's so well done because you're sitting here as a reader thinking, yeah, obviously this is going to happen, you idiot. But it's just so well done. It's similar to the Red Wedding. It's not as similar because I think her Cersei getting captured is more obvious. I think the Red Wedding, there's a lot more foreshadowing. There's a little more to it, but I think you as a reader understand what's probably going to happen more with Cersei than you could predict something like the Red Wedding. So Cersei, again, she's good at the beginning, really good at the end. She struggles in the middle, and that's why she's number 3. Number 2, Brienne. Brienne is similar to Cersei when it comes to she has her good, her bad. But when I say Brienne, when you get to chapter 5, she is the best POV of the book. I mean, the problem, the reason she's not number 1 is because she's very inconsistent. First 4 chapters can be very slow, very long to get through because they're all long chapters. Not much really starts happening until like chapter 4, but then still not like one of the best POVs until chapter 5 when we start getting into more of an aim for Brienne's character. Brienne doesn't have really a goal. She doesn't have any type of mystery around her character until like chapter 5. Because we start to realize, okay, she's going to go after hunting Arya because Arya is now alive. We know that from Brienne's POV, and she was spotted with the Hound. Well, wait a minute. There's somebody that did this attack on the salt pans who was the Hound, but we know the Hound's on the brink of death. So it adds mystery, it adds focus, it adds what can Brienne be doing? Because up to that point, it was like Brienne's trying to find Sansa. We know that's not going to happen. We know where Sansa is. So this all feels pointless. So all of that's really good. And so when we get to Brienne, we finally have that purpose, and we go through all these massive themes that I've talked about already. Some of the best writing, right? I love Brienne as a character, seeing her progression through, those last chapters, because the first half of her arc is really about building. It's just that building is very slow. And so I think if George had found a better way of doing that, but in fewer pages, or making it not feel as long, that would have really helped her. But I think number 2 is a good place, because number 1 is Jaime. Jaime is by far the most consistent POV of the book for the amount of chapters he has. There's not a bad Jaime chapter. Jaime has some really good chapters in this book. Namely, I love Jaime 1. I love Jaime, I believe it's 6. Those 2 chapters are really good. They're in my top 10. But Jaime 1, it's such a simple chapter. Jaime 1 is quite literally Jaime sitting over Tywin's body, but there's so much interesting things going on there, because it's him thinking on his choices, letting Tyrion go, everything that comes with that, right? And so I love Jaime as a character, because he goes on this journey of how does he deal with Cersei, right? Cersei's treating him like garbage. He's realizing Cersei's not a good person now. He's trying to disconnect away from Cersei, and so that happens literally physically. Cersei sends him away. We go on this journey through the Riverlands, where Jaime himself as a character is allowed to grow, become that general, become the face of House Lannister, right? Using their armies to show their power, putting houses into their place. And then the Riverland plot. I mean, River Run to me, when they get there, I've already talked about the vows, oath stuff that comes around with River Run, but seeing the Blackfish again, seeing the remnants of Robb's kingdom, all of it's awesome. The way Jaime finishes that plot, right, with his stuff with Edmure is fantastic. The way it's all that plot sets up for later in Winds of Winter. And we see Jaime become this man that, yeah, he's very much changed, right? But he's also willing to still be that villainous character like Tywin, right? He's still willing to threaten to shoot somebody's child into the castle walls, killing them. So I love that, all right? I love where Jaime ends as a character in this book as well, where he gets rid of Cersei's letter. He doesn't go to help Cersei. It's that final breaking of the two, where he says, no, I'm tired of being used by Cersei. And all the while finding more information out that, again, Cersei was sleeping with Lancel. She's probably been sleeping with a bunch of other dudes. It's so well written that there isn't a bad chapter with Jaime, because Jaime himself is a very interesting character. His dilemmas are very interesting as well. And so that is my rankings of the POVs.